It was 5:13 a.m. when I saw the notifications. 17 missed calls, 1 voicemail, all from a number I hadn't saved but recognized instantly. The moment my eyes adjusted to the screen's glow, my chest tightened. I hadn't spoken to my brother in nearly 10 years. Not after everything. Not after I stopped returning his birthday texts and he finally stopped sending them. I sat there, in the dim kitchen barefoot on the cold tile floor, phone clutched like it might combust in my hand. My dog Scout lifted his head from the couch ears, perked at the quiet buzz of another call, but I didn't answer. I just stared at the number as if by doing so I could hold back whatever was on the other end of that line. Then the screen dimmed and my reflection stared back. Sleep-matted curls, last night's mascara, shadowing under my eyes, a threadbare t-shirt that said, "Compassion is a strength." Fitting. I was a trauma therapist, 31 years old, owner of a small but steady private practice in Denver specializing in survivors of religious abuse. I had degrees, clients' rent paid 3 months ahead, but none of that mattered in that moment. Not when the past had somehow found my number again. I didn't want to hear the voicemail, but I hit play. Caleb's voice came through hoarse and fast. "Callie, it's me. You need to turn on the TV. Channel 7, I think. It's about Dad, about you. I didn't know they had video. You're on the news. It's..." "Callie, I'm sorry. I don't know what to say. Just call me." Okay, I didn't call him. Instead, I turned on the TV. I kept the volume low as if that might dull whatever was about to hit me. The local news was wrapping up weather, then cut to a breaking national story. The anchor's tone shifted. A disturbing video has surfaced this morning appearing to show a young girl abandoned by her parents at a desert rest stop more than 20 years ago. Online users identified the child as Rebecca Brandt, now known as Callie Brandt, a licensed therapist in Colorado. The footage has sparked outrage on social media and prompted law enforcement to reopen the case. Viewer discretion advised. And then, there it was, a grainy video time-stamped July 2004, a faded parking lot, a gas station, a pale girl too small for her oversized t-shirt standing alone near a trash can. She looks down the highway. She doesn't cry, doesn't move. She just waits. That girl was me. I hadn't seen that video before. I didn't know anyone had recorded it, but I remembered every second of that day. And even as the footage rolled, I could still smell the rubber of hot tires, the metallic taste of desert dust in my mouth. I could still hear my mother's voice through the rolled-down window, sharp with sarcasm, as she said, "Let's see how long it takes her to find her way back." My father laughed. Caleb was in the front seat, silent. I remember locking eyes with him in the rearview mirror as they drove away. They never came back. Eventually, a gas station clerk brought me inside. Called someone. I made up a story, said I'd gotten separated, told them my name was Beth, I was 11, and already learning how to lie to survive. The image cut to footage of my parents. A still from a local news segment years ago, Alan and Darlene Brandt smiling at a church event holding hands, the picture of moral authority. The caption below, "Founders of Faith-Driven Families, Counseling, Lubbock TX." I froze. Not just from shock, but from the wave of something colder. Recognition, exposure. The terrifying knowledge that the truth I'd buried, the past I'd rebuilt myself away from, had just broken the surface in front of the entire country. I turned off the TV. Scout jumped down and pressed against my leg tail low, sensing something wasn't right. I placed a hand on his head and whispered, "I'm okay, though I wasn't. I wasn't okay at all. My name is Callie Brandt. I've spent the last 20 years trying to become someone new, someone safe, someone no longer defined by the people who brought me into the world and then taught me I was only valuable if I obeyed. I used to be Rebecca Brandt, daughter of Alan and Darlene, the well-known Christian counselors in West Texas who believed discipline was next to godliness and that pain was how children grew strong. I used to believe their silence was the truth, that maybe I had deserved what happened that day at mile 137. But now it wasn't just my memory. It was evidence. It was footage. It was real. I sank into the kitchen chair and opened my phone again. I didn't call Caleb back. I didn't know what I would say if I did. Instead, I opened the Reddit app, half hoping, half dreading, and searched Rest Stop Girl. The thread had over 60,000 upvotes. The original post read, "My uncle used to work security at this gas station in Arizona. He always said he saw something that haunted him. We found this tape when cleaning out his stuff after he passed. He said, she just stood there for hours. I don't think they ever came back." There were comments, hundreds, thousands. How can parents do this? This is straight up child abandonment. She looks terrified. Someone needs to pay for this. Wait, this is the therapist from TikTok, the one who posts about religious trauma. OMG, that makes so much sense now. My stomach twisted. I had worked hard to separate my public work from my private pain. When people asked why I became a therapist, I had my clean answers. Because I believed in resilience. Because I wanted to help people reclaim their voice. I never said, because I lost mine at 11 and no one looked for it. And now, the world had found it. Scout gave a small whine, pawing at me. I looked at him, my one-eyed mutt with the lopsided ears and the heart of gold, and exhaled. I could already feel the wheels turning, media press, maybe, even law enforcement. My email would fill up. My office phone would ring. And someone, somewhere, was already framing a response. My parents, their lawyer, maybe even their church. There was a time, not that long ago, when I would have panicked, curled into myself, waited for the story to die like I always tried to do, but not anymore. I stood up, steadied my breath, and walked to the window. The sky was still dark outside, the world just starting to shift into morning. And somewhere out there, my past had woken up too. When I was 8, my parents made me write Bible verses until my hand cramped. I'd asked why we couldn't wear jeans to church like the Jefferson girls did. My mother called it back talk. My father called it rooting out pride. I wrote Proverbs 13:24 52 times that night. He who spares the rod hates his son. I remember the ink smudging on my wrist, my fingers stiff from gripping the pen too hard, and Darlene standing in the doorway with a glass of iced tea watching. Always watching. To the outside world, we were the Brants of Lubbock. Polished, principled, a family rooted in God's order and American values. My father, Alan, ran the Faith-Driven Families Counseling Ministry just off Loop 289. My mother co-hosted a local radio program for Christian mothers raising warriors of the Word. People stopped us in grocery stores to ask for parenting advice. Women brought her pies as thanks for saving their daughter's spirit. Men shook my father's hand and called him a moral compass in a culture gone soft. At church, we sat in the second row every Sunday. Front was too showy, back was for stragglers. We dressed like mannequins for modesty catalogs. Caleb in pressed slacks and a side part me in calico dresses with Peter Pan collars and tights that never stayed up. I learned to smile with my lips closed and my spine straight. My mother said posture was a reflection of gratitude. My father said children should be silent in the house of the Lord unless spoken to. The congregation adored us. Teachers complimented our manners. Neighbors said we were so well behaved, and maybe we were. But inside that beige vinyl-sided home on Elderberry Lane, something else reigned. Obedience wasn't just encouraged, it was mandatory. Delayed response was defiance. Tears were manipulation. Emotions, unless carefully controlled, were evidence of rebellion. Joyful submission was the gold standard, and anything less required correction. My mother wielded silence like a weapon. Her punishments weren't loud, they were surgical. A fork removed from your plate, a locked bedroom door, a phone call canceled the day of. Once, after I forgot to scrub the grout around the toilet base, she made me eat dinner in the garage. Contaminated spirit, contaminated space. She said flatly, Alan was worse when no one was watching. He never hit with fists, he was too smart for that. He used belts, Bibles, sometimes a switch from the tree out back. His words cut deeper than anything physical. You're lucky to be our burden. God gives the hardest children to the holiest parents. I believed him. Caleb never got the switch. He was 5 years older and wore obedience like armor. By 14, he could quote Corinthians backward and had a church internship shadowing the associate pastor. He led youth Bible study, played piano on Sundays. My parents called him a promise fulfilled. They beamed when he entered the room. To be fair, Caleb wasn't cruel, but he was silent. Always silent. I once begged him to lie for me, say I had helped fold the towels when I hadn't. He wouldn't. He didn't even look at me when he told the truth, just stared at the floor like looking at me might stain him. The night I turned 11, he gave me a flashlight wrapped in newspaper. For when you need to see where they won't look, he whispered. I kept it under my pillow for years. One afternoon, I came to school with a bruise the size of a pear on my upper arm. A substitute teacher, Miss Givens, asked me what happened. I froze. She looked me in the eye and said gently, "You don't have to lie, sweetheart." I told her I'd fallen off my bike. I didn't even own a bike. The next day she wasn't there. I later learned she'd been reassigned. That was the power the Brants held. Our family tithed generously, hosted family renewal seminars for local educators. We were above suspicion. My mother always said, reputation is the fragrance of righteousness. I learned early on that no one cared what the flower really looked like as long as it smelled good in public. Still, I tried to push back in small ways. I wrote journal entries I buried in the backyard. I drew pictures in my school planner, quiet rebellions with cartoon girls who wore jeans and laughed out loud. My mother found them once. I didn't get dinner that night, or the night after. She said hunger was God's natural consequence for wastefulness. Eventually, I stopped drawing. By the time I reached middle school, I had been labeled the difficult one. My questions were seen as challenges, my silences as sulking. I was told over and over again that I had a spirit of discord, that I was Satan's foothold in the family. Once my mother poured olive oil on my head in the middle of the night, anointing me for deliverance. I woke up crying, drenched and shaking as my parents prayed in tongues over me. I still smell that oil sometimes when I get migraines. Looking back, I know I wasn't difficult. I was just awake. I noticed things. The way my father's tone changed on the phone with donors. The way my mother's smile twitched when the radio light blinked on. The way Caleb flinched when Alan patted his shoulder too hard. I knew something was wrong, but wrong was normal in our house, so I played the game. Until I couldn't. And then came mile 137. It was supposed to be a road trip, a spiritual retreat before Caleb's college send-off. 4 days through the desert to see old mission churches. We were halfway between nothing and nowhere when I asked why I wasn't allowed to ride in the front seat. Because you're not ready, my father said. I said, ready for what he pulled the car over. The rest is a blur I never stop remembering. Standing there, heat rising off the asphalt. Caleb not meeting my eyes. Darlene's voice like smoke. You think you're so smart. Let's see how long you last on your own. The doors slammed. The car drove off. I remember the taste of panic, like copper and dust and the inside of my own mouth. They came back hours later. But not before a stranger saw me. Not before a camcorder caught the moment. Not before I learned that obedience could be undone and survival might mean disobedience. They never mentioned it again. No apology, no explanation, just silence. That was the Brant way. Later, I would come to see it for what it was, a power play, a test, a warning. But that day marked the beginning of the end, and now, 2 decades later, the footage was on the news, and the truth, long buried beneath performance and sermons and perfect Christmas cards, was loose in the world. The Brants of Lubbock had always controlled the narrative, but the story was finally escaping the script. The day they left me wasn't stormy. That's the part that always feels wrong in the retelling. There were no dark clouds, no lightning strikes, no metaphor to soften the blow. Just sun. Endless, crushing sun. We'd been on the road for almost 5 hours. I sat in the back seat, sweat pooling behind my knees, legs sticking to the vinyl. Caleb rode up front, flipping through my father's highlighted devotional like he was actually reading it. My mother hummed to some worship track on the cassette deck. My father drove in silence, both hands on the wheel jaw set like stone. I asked if we could stop for lunch. It was almost noon. We hadn't eaten since sunrise. My father didn't respond. My mother did. Do you think Jesus asked for lunch during his 40 days in the desert? I pressed my lips together. I already knew better than to answer. That's when we pulled off onto a dirt access road. No signs, no rest area, no facilities. Just a sun-bleached trash can, a rusted picnic bench, and the faded skeleton of a vending machine that hadn't worked in years. There was no one in sight. No cars, no stores, no noise, but the wind scraping dust against gravel. Mile marker, 137. My father turned off the ignition. "We're here," he said. I didn't understand. I looked at Caleb. He didn't look back. "We're doing something special today," my father continued. "Something important." My mother got out and opened the rear door. "Out," she said, her smile too wide. I hesitated. My father turned around, locking eyes with me. "This is your moment to prove your worth to God. Rebecca?" I stepped out. The heat hit like a slap. It was over 105 degrees. The air shimmered in waves off the hood. My sandals sank into soft tar near the shoulder. "Take this time to pray, to reflect," my father said. "If your heart is clean, the Lord will bring you home. We're trusting Him to show you the way." I blinked at them. "Wait, what?" "You've been warned, Rebecca," my mother said sharply. "Your mouth, your defiance, your spirit. This is what disobedience leads to separation. Don't make it exile." My heart started to pound. "You can't leave me here." "You're not being left. You're being tested." My father's voice was calm, almost gentle. "And God's mercy will be shown if you are worthy." I turned to Caleb, panicked. "Please, say something." He wouldn't meet my eyes. They got in the car. The door slammed. And then they were gone. Just gone. The dust kicked up in the wake of their tires, clung to the back of my throat. I ran after them, screaming. "Wait, wait." My voice cracked before the car disappeared over the hill. The silence that followed was worse. At first, I stood there, just stood, my arms wrapped tight around myself like that might keep me from flying apart. Minutes passed, then longer. I sat on the hot concrete and waited. For them to circle back. For Caleb to scream, "Just kidding." For anything. They didn't. I had no food, no money, no water, no ID, just a floral tank top, a fraying denim skirt, and a pair of plastic flip-flops that melted slightly onto the asphalt when I tried to walk. I tried walking east, then west. I couldn't tell which direction they'd gone. There were no cars, not one. The sun beat down with a cruel consistency and the edges of my vision began to flicker. I started to cry, then stopped myself. Crying made it worse. Crying meant weakness. Weakness meant sin. So I sat on the dirt and waited. Every now and then, a car would pass on the distant highway, but no one stopped. No one saw me. Hours blurred. I don't remember when I started hallucinating, but I know I saw a figure in white walk by twice. Once, holding a lantern. Once with wings. Both times, she looked like my grandmother. Both times, I passed out. When I came to, the sky was shifting, less brutal blue, more bruised pink. That's when I heard the engine. It was a truck, not a pickup, a real semi. Big, blue, dusty. It pulled over slow brakes, hissing like an exhale. The door opened. A woman stepped down. She wore jeansy, a tank top, and a cap with a patch that read, U.S. Postal Service Retired. She was solid, broad-shouldered, hair gray and braided down one side. "You all right, honey?" she called. I couldn't speak. She came closer, slowly, like approaching a wounded animal. "My name's Irene. You can call me Malloy. That's what my CB buddies call me. You out here with someone?" I shook my head. Her face tightened. "You run away." "No," I whispered. "They left me." She didn't ask why, just crouched next to me and handed me a bottle of water. "Let's get you in the shade, baby girl. You're burning up." Irene sat me in the truck cab, gave me crackers and Gatorade. She asked for my name. I told her Beth. She didn't press. She radioed for help. Stayed with me while I trembled. Let me hold her calloused hand as my whole body shivered from dehydration and fear. About an hour later, a police car rolled up. Sheriff Bryce, Mojave County, mid-50s, pockmarked face, mirrored sunglasses. He looked annoyed. He didn't write much down. Asked a few perfunctory questions, didn't even glance at Irene. I called it in, she said. Kid says her parents left her. They say she ran off, he replied. Just took their eyes off her at the pump. They were frantic. They came back. Eventually, been driving around looking all day. I remember the exact moment they returned. The black SUV pulling in slow. Caleb in the backseat, head down. My mother's lipstick too perfect. My father's shirt too pressed. Darlene gasped when she saw me. Rebecca? Thank the Lord. Alan hugged me. I didn't hug back. She slipped away at a rest stop. He explained smoothly. We turned around the moment we noticed. Irene narrowed her eyes. You left your daughter in this heat with no water. It was an accident, my mother said quickly. She's imaginative. Always has been. Bryce didn't ask further, just nodded, handed them a clipboard. Get her checked out. Keep her close. Irene watched them put me back in the SUV. She mouthed something through the window as we pulled away. This isn't over, but it was, at least on paper. Child Protective Services opened a file. There was a wellness check, a few polite interviews, and then nothing. My father's friend on the city council made a few calls. My mother's Bible study friends wrote letters. Sheriff Bryce said he saw no signs of abuse. The file was closed. Irene called once. Left a message. If you ever need anything, kiddo, you call Malloy. I see you. I never called, but I kept the scrap of paper with her number under my pillow until I left home 4 years later. And that was mile 137. That was the day I stopped believing rescue was coming. That was the day I realized survival would be up to me. We got home 2 days after they left me in the desert. No one asked why I was quieter, or why my eyes darted toward exits, or why I couldn't sleep without the hallway light on anymore. My mother said I was humbled. My father called it the fruit of conviction. Lubbock welcomed us back like we'd returned from a noble mission. People clapped when Alan gave his sermon, Trials Forge Testimonies. He never mentioned me by name, just spoke of a daughter who walked through the wilderness and found grace on the other side. Women nodded, misty-eyed. Men said, Amen. At school, things changed. My teacher, Mrs. Farnsworth, who used to praise my essays and let me stay in during recess to read, suddenly kept her distance. I'd walk into class and feel it like someone had adjusted the thermostat 1 degree colder. When I raised my hand, she barely glanced my way. At first, I thought I'd done something wrong. Then I saw the look she gave my mother at pickup one day something, between fear and reverence. That's when I understood. The story they told was simple. I had run away, gotten turned around at a rest stop, caused a panic. They drove for hours praying. They found me through God's mercy. Alan even cried when he spoke about it on his local radio spot. She's wild-hearted, our youngest, but we believe in taming with truth, not chains. No one questioned them. No one ever did. I tried telling the truth to my Sunday school teacher, to the librarian, to the neighbor who sometimes slipped me candy in the mailbox. They all smiled the same way, tight-lipped, patronizing the way you smile at someone who's not right in the head. My therapist, Ms. Delaney, listened. She believed me. She started documenting what I said. We need to establish a pattern, she told me softly one afternoon. It's not enough to speak once we have to keep a record. 2 weeks later, my mother pulled me from sessions. She's feeding into delusion, Darlene snapped. We're going back to faith-based counseling. At church, Pastor Morton gave a sermon on deception. Sometimes the devil works through children, especially the clever ones, he said, eyes lingering on me. Disobedience is the first door to possession. Someone in the back murmured, preach. I started having headaches again, waking up with clenched fists. I chewed through 3 pencils in a week. My journal disappeared. It had been under my mattress, filled with drawings, notes, memories. Gone. My mother said I probably misplaced it. That night, Caleb avoided me entirely, wouldn't look at me across the dinner table. "Why won't you say something?" I whispered as he cleared plates. He didn't answer. But as he passed, he whispered back, "You're making it worse." Worse for who the final straw was Miss Tanner, the school counselor. She wasn't from Lubbock. Moved from Santa Fe after her divorce, wore chunky earrings and had a sunflower tattoo on her wrist. She saw me during routine scheduling and asked how I was doing. I told her everything. Not all at once, but enough. The desert, the test, the silence. She listened like no one else had, wrote things down, asked smart questions. She said she'd need to make a formal report. For the first time in months, I felt something like relief. 2 weeks later, she was gone. Personal leave, the front desk lady said. Her replacement never looked me in the eye. I started to understand how deep it went, what reputation could buy, that the truth didn't matter if you didn't own the microphone. Then came Dr. Jensen, a court-appointed child psychologist brought in after a separate anonymous report to CPS. He met me 3 times. Each time he asked the same questions. Were you touched inappropriately? Did they leave marks? Did anyone witness the abandonment? I told him the desert wasn't about touching. It was about control. It was about erasure. He didn't write much. A month later, my parents held a meeting with him at the house. I wasn't invited, but afterward my mother announced, "The professional agrees you're dramatizing. We're moving forward in love." I thought that was the end. But then the unexpected happened. A woman showed up at school, CPS again, different worker, tighter suit, sharper tone. She pulled me from class, asked the same questions, but this time she believed me. I could feel it. There was no eye roll, no sideways look. That night I didn't go home. I was placed in emergency foster care just outside Amarillo. The Brants didn't fight it. There was no custody battle, no protest, no farewell. They let me go before the state did, I would later say. I was a liability, not a daughter. I stayed in that home for 6 months. My foster mother was quiet but kind. Let me pick out my own cereal. Taught me how to use a washing machine. For my 12th birthday, she bought me a journal with a lock. I filled it slowly, one memory at a time. The night I met Hannah and Marla, I didn't say a word. Not hello, not nice to meet you, not even where am I. I sat stiffly on their powder blue couch in Denver backpack, clutched to my chest, the edges fraying like my sleeves. I remember the air smelled like lemon and cumin someone had been cooking. And it wasn't for show. The lights were soft, the couch plush, the walls lined with books and framed postcards. There were no crosses on the walls, no framed family creeds, just art and warmth and space. Hannah offered me hot cocoa. Marla asked if I liked dogs. I didn't answer, but I didn't run either. They never pushed. Not that first night, not the next morning, not even when I refused to unpack for 3 days straight. They just gave me space. And that, more than anything, made me curious. I kept waiting for the rules to be posted, for the lectures, for the questions about my soul. None came. On the 5th night, I woke up crying. A full-body sob, the kind that leaves your lungs empty and your throat raw. I hadn't cried like that since mile 137. Marla sat on the edge of my bed and didn't say anything. Just rubbed my back in circles, slow and steady. After a while, Hannah brought a glass of water. When I finally stopped shaking, Marla said quietly, "You don't have to talk, but we're not going anywhere," and they didn't. That was the first place I ever heard the words. "We're proud of you." I didn't know what to do with them. But I wanted to hear them again. 6 months in, I asked if I could change my name. Rebecca was too loaded, too tied to prayers and punishment and the sound of my mother's voice echoing down the hallway. I didn't want to erase myself. I wanted to reclaim me, find the parts they never touched. So I became Callie, a name I'd once seen scribbled on the back of a library book checkout slip. It felt soft, unassuming. Mine. They didn't hesitate. "We'll start using it today," Hannah said. They bought a cake that said, "Welcome, Callie." They invited no one but me. When I was 15, they found me a new therapist, Dr. Anita Reyes, Latina, sharp-witted, fond of red lipstick and chunky jewelry. She didn't look like any counselor I'd known. She didn't talk like them either. "You survived a cult," she told me during our first session. "Let's not sugarcoat it." I blinked. She leaned forward. "That's not weakness. That's adaptation. We're going to teach your nervous system that the war is over." She introduced me to EMDR, to grounding techniques, to trauma maps and somatic release. She gave me an old art journal and said, "If you can't say it, draw it." So I drew. I drew a girl standing under a black sun. I drew a hand holding a match. I drew the desert. Dr. Reyes never asked if it was true. She just nodded and said, "That's powerful." Over time, we built language around things I'd once only felt in my body. Tight throats, phantom heat, the sudden need to run. She taught me that safety wasn't just the absence of threat, it was the presence of connection and control and choice. Words I'd never had growing up. By 16, I'd stopped flinching when people said my name. By 17, I was painting with oils. By 18, I was accepted into the Rocky Mountain College of Art and Design. But something tugged at me. A sense that painting alone wasn't enough. I wanted to know why people believed lies, why systems protected power over truth, why children were taught to fear themselves, why people called harm love. So I changed majors, psychology, then religious studies, then back to psychology. I wanted to trace the roots of everything I'd been taught and tear them up by the roots. By 23, I had my BA. By 25, I had an MA in counseling psychology with a certification in trauma recovery and a specialization in religious trauma. I interned at a clinic in Boulder that served survivors of high-control groups. I co-led group therapy with ex-members of purity culture, megachurches, Mormon defectors, and homeschool escapees. And then I opened Rooted. It wasn't much 2 rooms above a pottery co-op downtown. My waiting room had a secondhand couch and a fake ficus plant with a bird's nest tucked inside. But it was mine. My license hung crooked on the wall. My intake forms didn't ask for religion. Clients came slowly at first, then through word of mouth. A former Jehovah's Witness, a woman who'd escaped a reformatory boarding school, a man whose father led a breakaway sect in the Ozarks. We never started with, "What happened to you?" We started with, "What's the first time you remember being told you were bad?" My voice shook for the first few sessions, but then it didn't. I was helping people walk back through their own deserts and come out the other side. And that felt like a kind of justice, a quiet one. I met Audrey at a restorative justice conference. She was giving a keynote on housing equity. She wore a blazer over jeans and called out the mayor from the podium like it was nothing. We bumped into each other at the coffee table during a break. She asked what I did. I said I worked with trauma survivors. She said, "So you're the one who fixes the things I'm trying to prevent." I laughed. And just like that, we started something. She moved in 9 months later. Scout adored her. She planted mint and lavender on our balcony. I started sleeping with the window open again. Audrey knows about my family. Sort of. She knows I was in foster care, that I changed my name, that there was abuse, but not the kind you see in Lifetime movies. More like spiritual warfare masquerading as discipline. She never pried. Until now. The morning after the news broke the video, the footage, the whole internet calling me, "Rest stop girl," I sat her down. I told her everything. Mile 137. The test. The lies. Irene Malloy. The way I waited for someone to come and how no one did for 12 hours. The way my parents hugged me for the camera and threw away my drawings that night. Audrey didn't speak for a long time, just took my hand, rubbed her thumb over my scarred knuckle, the one I used to chew when I got anxious. Finally, she said, "You still became someone good. That's the miracle." But it didn't feel like a miracle. It felt like survival. And now that survival was going to be seen by everyone. The video hit Reddit on a Tuesday. A throwaway post in a nostalgia thread called "Things That Still Haunt Me." A user named Waylon1979 wrote, My uncle worked highway surveillance in Arizona back in the day. Always said there was one clip he couldn't forget. Just found the tape in a box from his garage. I digitized it. Here. It was blurry time-stamped in the corner. JUL 11 2004. Mile marker 137. There was no sound. The camera shook slightly as it zoomed in on a young girl standing beside a rusted trash barrel. She was small, barely 11, long hair tied tight. Her hands were clasped in front of her, then behind her, then dropped like they didn't know what to do. She looked down the road, back toward the highway, then down again. She didn't cry. She just stood. The post said, "He always said this clip felt wrong, like she was waiting for someone who wasn't coming." It got 34 upvotes in the first hour. By midnight, it had $12,000. Audrey found it first. She came into the kitchen holding her phone like it might break. "Callie," she said, "you need to see this." I watched it once. Then I closed my laptop, but the internet didn't. By Thursday, it was on TikTok. Users overlaid sad piano music, typing things like "she's still waiting," and this broke me. A few self-proclaimed empaths speculated about trafficking. Some blamed hippie parents. Someone slowed it down and claimed the girl blinked a secret message in Morse code. Of course they did. It was surreal watching yourself become a ghost. Then came the email from a podcast producer. "Hi, Callie. Love your work. Wondering if you'd be open to talking about your experience at mile 137 for an episode of our upcoming miniseries Lost and Found." They attached a photo of themselves in a branded hoodie and said they'd fly out to record in a trauma-sensitive way. I deleted it. Then came the journalists, then the tabloid headlines, then the calls to my clinic line, which Audrey quickly rerouted to a burner voicemail. People didn't want to help. They wanted to gawk, or confess, or ask if I was the girl who got purity tested in the desert. But buried in the noise was a message forwarded to me by a journalist named Tanya Ortega from KOB, New Mexico. She had been one of the few who didn't sensationalize it. Her segment was 2 minutes long and didn't call it child abandonment. She called it religious neglect. That mattered. Her email subject line was, "I think I found someone who knew you." It read, "Hi, Callie." A woman named Irene Malloy reached out after our segment aired. She says she used to be a long-haul trucker and believes she was the one who called for help that day. She's not on social media, but she asked if I could forward her number to you. No pressure. Just thought you'd want to know. I stared at it for 20 minutes, then I called. Her voice was raspy, desert-worn. "Hello, Irene," I said. "This is Callie." A long pause. Then a soft chuckle. "Well, I'll be damned. You talk now." We met a week later at a diner in Las Cruces, New Mexico. She insisted on paying for my coffee. She looked like someone who'd seen every inch of I-10. Gray hair in a tight braid, a denim vest covered in patches. Her hands were large and calloused, but when she held her mug, they were steady. "You know," she said, "after we sat, I always figured that day would come back to me. But not like this. Not on the damn internet." I smiled weakly. The internet's good at digging up ghosts. She tapped the side of her mug. "You were so quiet. I remember your eyes, like you were trying to disappear." I nodded. "I think I was." She looked down. "I still see you sometimes. I didn't know what to do. You didn't look hurt, but you didn't look safe, just standing there like you'd been parked. You were the only one who stopped." "I didn't even stop, right?" she said, almost ashamed. I radioed it in first, kept driving a few miles because I didn't know if it was a setup or something. I'd heard stories, but it didn't sit right. So I turned around. "Found you still standing there?" I remembered her boots, big, brown, scuffed. I'd stared at them as she crouched down, asked my name, if I was hungry. I couldn't speak then, just nodded. "You gave me a granola bar," I said, "and a bottle of water." Her eyes watered. God, I forgot about that. I didn't. She asked if I ever heard what happened after. I told her my parents came back hours later and lied to the cops, that a sheriff they knew waved the report off, that I was labeled a runaway unstable, ungrateful. She looked furious. You don't leave a kid like that and call it love. That's not discipline. That's delusion. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear that from someone who was there. Can I ask why you came back? I said. After all these years, she looked out the window. The sun was dipping over the parking lot, casting long, amber shadows. I've got grandkids now, she said finally. And I told myself if I ever had the chance to set something right, even a little, I would. She reached into her vest pocket and pulled out a tiny Polaroid. I took this that day, for the record, in case the cops didn't believe me. Hope you don't mind. She slid it across the table. There I was, standing next to her truck, a little girl with tangled hair and 2 big sneakers, one hand shielding my eyes from the sun. You didn't look afraid, she said. You looked like someone who'd already been through worse. We sat in silence for a while. Then she said something I'll never forget. You weren't lost, Callie. You were abandoned. There's a difference. One implies it was your fault. I let that settle. Do you want the picture, she asked? I nodded. Yes. Please. She smiled. Then it's yours. We hugged outside the diner. Her arms were strong. She smelled like lavender and diesel fuel. Before we parted, she looked at me one more time and said, You made it further than they ever imagined. I hope you know that. On the drive back, I cried. Not because I was sad, because for the first time in a long time, the truth had a witness. And sometimes that's all a survivor needs. It arrived in a plain white envelope, no return address, postmarked from Amarillo. At first I thought it was another stranger trying to weigh in on my trauma. Another letter that began with, I saw your story and just had to reach out. I almost threw it away, but the handwriting stopped me. It was blocky, deliberate, a little too neat to be natural. Caleb used to write like that when he was nervous. I opened it with shaking hands. Callie, I've started this letter 6 different ways. None of them felt right, but none of them felt more honest than this, I'm sorry. For everything. For the years of silence, for being part of the lie, for watching it happen, and doing nothing. I don't know if you remember, but I was there the night before the trip. I heard Dad say something to Mom in the kitchen about testing your resolve. I didn't ask questions. I pretended I didn't hear. When we got to the rest stop, I felt sick. I knew something wasn't right, but I stayed in the car. I watched you through the mirror. I saw you standing there clutching that red lunchbox with the stickers all over it. And when the cops came later, I was the one who signed the statement that said you ran off. I was 15. I told myself I didn't have a choice. I told myself they'd throw me out too, that we'd both disappear, but the truth is I was a coward, and I don't expect you to forgive that. I just wanted you to know that it's haunted me, especially now. I have 2 kids. Amelia is 12. Same age you were. She asks 1,000 questions a day. She interrupts. She talks too fast. She makes up songs about planets, and all I can think is how you were punished for being just like that. I didn't know how to be your brother back then, but I want to try now. I know it's late. It might be too late. But if there's a chance to talk, to hear your voice, even if it's to tell me off, I'd be grateful. With remorse, Caleb, I stared at the paper until the letters blurred, folded and unfolded it 3 times. I read it again, slower, and again. I hadn't heard from Caleb in over 15 years. Last I knew, he'd moved to Dallas, worked in financial services, married a woman who taught Sunday school. When the story broke online, he didn't comment. He didn't call. He didn't post a supportive status like some distant cousins did. I assumed he'd chosen silence again. But now this. It wasn't a justification. It wasn't a defense. It was a confession. A small, crumpled bridge offered across the scorched canyon between us. I left the letter on the kitchen table and went out onto the balcony. Audrey followed a few minutes later, 2 mugs of mint tea in hand. She passed me one, sat beside me. Didn't push. After a few minutes, I said, Caleb wrote to me. She raised her eyebrows, but waited. I told her what he said, about the false statement, the mirror, the red lunchbox. Amelia. She listened. No interruptions. Just the quiet hum of cars below and the wind brushing through the lavender pots. When I finished, I looked over. What do I do with that? I asked. Audrey sipped her tea. Then maybe this isn't about forgiving him. Maybe it's about hearing yourself say it out loud. Say that you were right, that you were there, that it happened. To someone who was supposed to protect you? I didn't answer. I'm not saying talk to him for his sake, she added. I'm saying maybe naming the truth to him helps you too. That night I reread the letter. I thought about the lunchbox. It had glow-in-the-dark planets and a Velcro strap that never worked right. I'd covered it in Lisa Frank stickers and doodled tiny dragons on the inside lid. I lost it that day. I remembered Caleb as a lanky teenager, always adjusting his collar, trying to disappear into Dad's shadow. He had been groomed differently than me, taught to obey without question, to lead without empathy. He was the strong one, the future head of the household. But he'd been a child too, and maybe that was what made it worse. He knew better. But he didn't do better. I spent the next few days thinking not about what he wrote, but about what it cost him to write it. We don't talk enough about what it takes to break the spell of family mythology, especially when you're the one who benefited. He was the golden child, the chosen one, the son with the clean transcript and the spotless church shoes. And yet, here he was, risking the script, naming the rot. I thought about Amelia, about what it meant that she reminded him of me, about how generational damage doesn't end unless someone says no more. I wondered if his letter was that moment, his no more. The next morning I wrote back, Caleb, thank you for your letter. I've read it more than once. I can't say what it means yet or what it will lead to, but I believe you meant it, and that counts for something. You're right, Amelia deserves better. So does every kid. So did I. I wish you had spoken up. I wish someone had, but I'm not writing to punish you. I'm writing to acknowledge the truth. I was left at that rest stop. You saw it. You knew it. And now you've said it. That matters. More than you know. I don't know if I'm ready to talk yet, but I appreciate the offer. I appreciate that you want to try. Callie. I signed it with my new name, the one he never knew. And as I sealed the envelope, something loosened in my chest. Not forgiveness, not peace, but maybe the beginning of space, and space. That was a start. The courthouse smelled like mildew and hand sanitizer. It was colder than I expected. Not just in temperature, but in spirit. Bureaucracy has a way of draining places of warmth, even when justice is on the line. I hadn't planned to go. When the DA's office called and asked if I'd attend the pretrial conference just to observe, I froze. For days, I let the voicemail sit in my inbox unopened. Audrey found me staring at the screen one night, wine untouched phone in hand. You don't have to go, she said, gently. I know. But you want to... I don't know what I want, I whispered. It wasn't about facing them. I'd done that already in the quiet of my own therapy. In the nights when nightmares woke me at 2 a.m., it wasn't about revenge. Not anymore. It was about witnessing. That word kept circling in my head like a slow-moving hawk witness. Not participant, not forgiver, not even daughter. Just a living record. So I went. The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined. I sat near the back, just far enough to keep my breathing steady, just close enough to see their faces. Darlene looked thinner. Her hair dyed too dark for her age, pulled back so tightly it sharpened the angles of her face. She clutched a rosary in one hand like a lifeline, though I'd never known her to carry one before. Alan sat next to her, unmoving. His eyes were flat, calm, almost blank. The same stare he used to give me when I cried during punishments. The gaze of a man who saw tears as weakness. Their lawyer, a man named Blake Hauser, rose to speak first. Southern drawl, crisp suit, and the smug confidence of someone who'd defended televangelists before. These are not crimes, he said, smoothly, glancing at the table of prosecutors. They are religious rights, disciplinary frameworks, and, above all, protected expressions of faith under the First Amendment. He gestured to Alan and Darlene, who sat like brittle statues beside him. They didn't abandon their daughter. They tested her moral clarity. They didn't harm her. They believed God would guide her. You may not understand their methods, but that doesn't make them monsters. It makes them devout. There was a long pause. No one spoke. No one. The judge scribbled something. The air thickened. Then the prosecutor stood. "We've interviewed 3 other families counseled by the Brants," she said. Her voice was calm, grounded. In each case, similar disciplinary tactics were employed. Extended isolation, forced silence, food withholding. One child, 8 years old, was locked in a storage closet for 4 days. Another was left at a gas station for 12 hours with a Bible and a jug of water. This is not faith. This is abuse. She looked around the courtroom. This is not religious freedom. This is strategic cruelty. My stomach twisted. I hadn't heard those cases before. I wasn't sure if that made it better or worse, knowing I wasn't alone or knowing it had happened again. Then the judge asked if any victim wished to speak. I didn't plan to. I really didn't. But my legs stood before my mind caught up. The clerk called my name. I stepped forward. My heartbeat was in my throat, my mouth dry, but my voice was steady. "My name is Callie Brandt. I was 11 years old when my parents left me at a rest stop in Arizona with no ID, no money, and no water. It was 106 degrees. I waited alone for nearly 12 hours. I let the silence sit. They called it a purity test. They told me God would guide me home if I was clean of sin, but what they really did was abandon me. And then lie to the police, to my school, to our entire church. I looked directly at Alan, then Darlene. You didn't test my faith. You tested how long I could survive your shame. You tried to make me your sacrifice, to prove a point about obedience. I turned to the judge. I'm not here to punish them. I'm not asking for vengeance. I'm here so that truth has a body, so that someone says, this happened, this mattered, and it wasn't holy, it was cruel. I sat down. My knees were shaking. That's when it happened. Alan twitched, first just his fingers, then his whole hand, then both arms began to tremble. He hunched forward, eyes rolling slightly, breath shallow. Darlene reached for him, panic in her voice. Alan. The courtroom erupted. The judge called for a recess. EMTs were summoned. The bailiff cleared a path. I watched as my father, the unshakable, unyielding patriarch of 1,000 sermons, was strapped onto a gurney and wheeled away, gasping for breath. The mask had cracked, and the room saw what I had always known, that righteousness used as armor eventually caves in. Darlene didn't look at me. She just sat there holding her rosary, whispering a prayer to no one. The courtroom emptied slowly. I stepped outside, feeling the cold winter air bite at my skin. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just stood, letting it all settle. Audrey was waiting across the street. She didn't say anything, just opened the car door. As we drove away, I looked back once, and for the first time in years, I didn't see the house I was exiled from. I saw the house I walked out of, by choice. 1 year later, the front gate of mile 137 clanged shut behind the last volunteer of the evening. A soft dusk settled across the courtyard, blurring the mural on the south wall painted silhouettes of desert roads, winding toward a horizon of stars. Callie stood barefoot on the porch garden, gloves tucked in her back pocket, still holding a mug of tea that had long gone cold. Her thumb moved slowly across the ceramic, tracing the faint outline of a comet, hand-painted by one of the teens. Every tile in the main building had been touched by someone who knew what it meant to be left behind. The shelter was small, just 4 bedrooms, 1 communal kitchen, a sunroom turned counseling space, and a rotating team of trauma-informed staff. But it wasn't about size. It was about intention. Every inch of the place had been built with gentleness in mind. The name Mile 137 was her idea. It was the exact mile marker where she'd been left all those years ago. I wanted to reclaim it, she told NPR's This American Life, her voice steady but not detached. Not erase it. That spot shaped me, but it doesn't get to define me anymore. Now, when someone says Mile 137, I want it to mean safety, not survival. The segment aired 2 weeks ago. Since then, her inbox had flooded. Some messages were short. They made us kneel for hours. They called me a demon for asking questions. They said I'd burn if I ever left the church. Others were pages long, detailing years of religious manipulation disguised as love, as guidance, as salvation. Some came from kids, some from adults still untangling their childhood. She read everyone. Not all stories could be answered. Not all kids could be reached in time. But here, on this little stretch of reclaimed land outside Santa Fe, at least some could start again. The sound of sneakers on gravel pulled her attention. She turned, and there they were. Caleb, a little grayer around the temples, carrying a reusable grocery bag full of snacks, and Amelia, 12 years old, with a galaxy-patterned hoodie and the same stubborn cowlick Callie used to have. "Hey, Caleb," said Tentative. Callie gave a small smile. "Hey." Amelia walked right up to her. "My dad says you're my aunt." "That's right," Callie said, crouching slightly to meet her eyes. "And I hear you like planets." Amelia's eyes widened. "I'm building a solar system diorama, but my Venus melted. I used the wrong glue." Callie laughed. "That's okay. Venus is kind of hot-headed anyway." Caleb watched the exchange quietly. There was gratitude in his eyes, and something more fragile hope, maybe, or repair. They spent the afternoon touring the shelter. Amelia asked about every poster, every couch pillow, every piece of art on the walls. When they reached the back garden, she pointed at a sundial near the rosemary bush. "What's that?" That Callie said was the first thing planted here. My partner, Audrey, found it at a junkyard and said it deserved a second chance. Later, after they left, after Caleb hugged her longer than expected and Amelia slipped a handmade bookmark into her hand, Callie wandered back to the garden, blinking against the golden light. Audrey was waiting there. She wore jeans streaked with dirt and a paint-splattered hoodie that used to belong to Callie. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun. She held something small in one hand. "You missed dinner," Audrey said. "I know," Callie replied. Amelia needed to meet the comet tiles. Audrey stepped forward, nervous energy in her stance. "Remember when we went to the flea market and you found that half-broken wind chime that made the weirdest sound?" Callie chuckled. "The one that sounded like a goat sneezing." "Exactly. You said, 'Sometimes the broken ones make the best music.'" "I did say that." Audrey took a breath, then opened her hand. Inside was a ring, simple silver with a tiny etching of a star trail across the band. Callie blinked. "I don't need a big moment," Audrey said softly. "We've had enough of those, but I want this life. All of it. The shelter. The mornings where you cry over someone's email. The weird soups you make when you're stressed. I want you." Callie swallowed hard. Her throat felt tight full. "You don't have to answer right now," Audrey added. "I just thought maybe the garden deserved its own new beginning." Callie reached out slowly, took the ring, held it for a moment. Then she looked up and smiled, tears warm against her cheeks. "I used to believe love was conditional," she said. "That it could be taken away, that it had to be earned." She slipped the ring onto her finger, but what they tried to withhold, I learned to give myself. And now, I get to give it back. Audrey kissed her. The kind of kiss that didn't need to prove anything. The kind that simply stayed. As twilight fell across the shelter, the garden lights flickered on one by one, little halos of warmth dotting the dark. Inside, a new resident was settling into room 3. Outside, a wind chime sang its strange, broken melody, and at mile 137, love sounded like safety. Yes, like home. The road looked smaller now. Mile 137 didn't feel like the monstrous stretch of highway that once swallowed her whole. It was cracked, sun-bleached, dotted with patches of stubborn desert grass pushing through asphalt seams. The signage was rusted, barely legible. The Arizona heat was still relentless, though the wind, this time, carried a faint whisper of coolness. Callie parked on the shoulder just past the mile marker. The rest stop wasn't even listed on the highway's newer maps anymore. A few broken vending machines stood under a faded aluminum awning. The bathrooms had been boarded up long ago, vandalized and forgotten. A single bench sat beneath a warped shade structure split down the center from years of sun and rain. She stepped out of the car and felt the old air hit her. It wasn't just heat, it was memory, muscle memory, grief memory, the kind that settled into your joints before you even realized you were holding your breath. It had been over 20 years. She walked slowly to the spot she remembered best, the patch of dirt and gravel near the curb beside the old trash can. The bench was still there, tilted now, one leg shorter than the others, but still holding on. She sat. The air shimmered with that strange desert silence where even the birds seemed to speak in whispers. She pulled something from her bag, a laminated sketch. It wasn't anything special. Just a drawing she'd made when she was 11, scribbled in the back of a church flyer during one of the long reflection fasts her parents made her do after the rest stop. A girl with stick limbs and a sun 3 times too big hovering above her head. No face, just a caption scrawled in shaky pencil. Am I worth it? She'd found it again in her old therapy files. Dr. Reyes had tucked it away, likely knowing she wouldn't be ready to see it until much later. Now, she slid the laminated page under a small rock beside the bench. Not to mark territory, not to shout her story, just to leave something true behind. She let her eyes close for a moment. The same sun beat down. But she wasn't scared now. She wasn't 11. She wasn't waiting to be rescued. She was here because she chose to come. Footsteps crunched nearby. She looked up to see a woman approaching holding a child's hand. Maybe 6 or 7 years old. The girl had a ponytail and a backpack with glitter patches sewn on galaxy stars, a comet that looked oddly familiar. They were just passing through, stopping for a bathroom break that no longer existed. The mom glanced at Callie, just a flicker of a look, not pity, not concern, just a polite half-smile. Then she turned to her daughter and said something about getting back to the car, but the girl lingered. She looked at Callie, then at the sketch half-tucked under the rock, then back at Callie again. Is that yours? The girl asked softly. Callie nodded. It was. The girl didn't ask anything else. Just offered a quick, shy smile before running to catch up with her mother. They walked back to their car. The door slammed. The engine started. Then they were gone. Callie remained on the bench. She wasn't crying. Not this time. Because something inside her had already shifted months ago, years ago, maybe even back when Audrey placed that ring in her palm. She had spent so long trying to rewrite the meaning of this place. But maybe it wasn't about rewriting. Maybe it was about coexisting. The pain, the survival, the leaving, the returning. All of it. She stood slowly brushing gravel from the back of her jeans and looked one last time at the sketch under the rock. It didn't need an answer now, but if it ever found one, it would be this. Maybe they were the wrong people, but I never was the wrong child, and that was enough. If you've ever been made to feel unworthy because you questioned, doubted, or simply wanted to feel safe, know this: their fear of your truth does not make you wrong. It never did. You are not difficult for wanting to understand. You are not broken for needing more than silence. And you are not selfish for walking away from people who claimed to love you but only loved who they told you to be. Sometimes the people who hurt you will never say they're sorry. They might rewrite the past. They might double down. They might call you bitter, dramatic, ungrateful, anything to avoid looking at themselves. But none of that changes what happened, and none of it means you don't deserve healing. I spent years believing I had to earn love by staying quiet. I thought survival meant shrinking until I disappeared. But I was wrong. Love, that's real, doesn't demand you disappear. It meets you exactly as you are and stays. They left me alone in the desert. They called it a test. They told the world I ran. But I found my way out. And if you're still out there wandering, questioning, scared, you need to know something. There is a road back. Maybe not to them. Maybe not to the version of life they said was the only one that mattered. But back to yourself, to your breath, to your voice. And when you get there, when you start to feel the ground solid beneath your feet again, I hope you remember this. You were never the wrong child, and you were never alone.